Got the BMW 120D, and I'm going to be doing some rear brake pads and rear brake disc rotors. So this is going to be basically a guide on how to do it. So before we get into it, let's have a quick check on the tools you're going to require to get this job done. So the tools and consumables you're going to need for this job. Recommend a torque wrench. You can get away without it, but it is brake parts, so I recommend doing your torques. You probably need your main torques to deal with 65 Newton meters on the caliper bracket and 30 Newton meters for the caliper slide pins. So you may need 2 torque wrenches. Little flat blade screwdriver is handy. You may need a couple of socket extensions. Ratchet is good. Now, you can use either in-hex, Allen key set. I'm just using socket in-hex keys. So you'll need, the main ones you'll need is a 7mm and a 6mm. 16mm socket, 9mm ring spanner, that's for the bleed on the caliper, soft face hammer, either an F-clamp or one of those specific tools to push the pistons back in the brake calipers. You may need a breaker bar, just depends on your strength. Consumables, some brake clean, anti-seize, and some brake lubricant, or brake grease, whatever you want to call it. Also a 17mm socket for the wheels, and you can either use a rattle gun or your breaker bar. Also need a floor jack and some jack stands. For the rear jacking point, I've just gone straight onto the trolley jack, just straight onto the diff there. Now, car stands just straight on the jack points at the rear. And before you go too nuts, just give it a bit of a rock, make sure it's all stable. Now I'm just using my battery powered rattle gun just to zap off these wheel nuts. You can use your normal wheel brace or socket set if you don't have these. If you don't have the battery rattle gun, you can probably just crack these loose while the wheel is still on the ground. Makes it a bit easier. But these are a 17mm socket. And obviously both sides we're going to need. Now for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to be doing the one side. The other side's obviously exactly the same, so you don't need to do anything differently there. Now, why am I doing this? So these rear rotors are below their minimum thickness. That is 18.4mm from memory. You can measure those with a caliper or with a vernier. But the first thing we're going to need to do is get the brake caliper off. Now it's worth noting for the right rear, it has this brake wear pad indicator. Now these, I might just get a pair of long nose pliers, it just makes it a bit easier. And they just can pull straight out. Just try and be gentle and not break them, otherwise you'll be up for new ones. So they should just pull straight out. There we go. So they just held in these clips within the brake pad, and what all these do, the way they work is when the brakes pad wears significantly, they wear off this face, creates an open circuit, and then throws a fault up on your dash. Don't forget to put it back when we're done. Alright, so we need to remove the bolts for the caliper slide. So there's top at the bottom. Well, there's one at the top here. There's another one at the bottom. They've just got this little cap on the end of it that needs to come off. They can come off by hand, and then we just need to get a socket into it. Now these slide pins aren't overly tight, they're just a pin, 7mm in-hex on the end, and just unscrew. I think they're only 35 Newton meters to tighten up. So this bottom one can be a straight shot in, so I try and keep my hand out of shot. It can be a straight shot in with an extension. And before the caliper comes all the way off, we've got this clip here that needs to come off. So this basically has like a spring loaded, so it needs to come up and out that way. And there we go, that's it there. So it's just basically a spring load from here, and these little hooks there just hold into some little slots in there. Like I said earlier, this brake disc has a fair lip here, so the pads might not want to come out straight away. What we can do is we'll sort of work on levering this out, and it'll be good. So that pad just dropped out, and then this one can just come straight out. Now, this pad has got a little clip that holds it in the disc. Not in the disc, in the caliper piston. So we want to put this somewhere where we're not hanging it, so it's stressing out the brake line. So it doesn't hurt, just get a bit of a cable tie or something. You've got a nice handy bit of the subframe here just to cable tie it up to. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Alright, you can see I've just got that tie wired up, just that subframe. It's nice and handy, it's out of the way. Now we need to remove this brake caliper bracket. So for the brake caliper bracket, there is this bolt down the bottom and this one up the top here. Now this back caliper bracket bolt is 16mm. Now it should be fairly tight, 110 Newton meters. So you may need, oh no, that's all right. You may need a breaker bar to get it loose. Just depends on your strength really. So that's kind of doable. I was expecting to have to do it, throw an extension on this slide T, but not necessary. So we'll just remove those two bolts, and then that caliper bracket can come off. So I'll throw that aside. Next, it's obviously the disc. Now the only thing really holding it on here is there's one in-hex bolt here. That is your 6mm. So you can either use in-hex socket or just a normal Allen key set, but it shouldn't be overly tight because, like I said, it's only just there to hold the disc in place. Now sometimes you may get lucky and this will come straight off without too much hassle, but yeah, I don't know. So I'm just going to use this soft face hammer. I'll just give it a couple of belts around the face of the hub. And sometimes it might come loose, sometimes not. Can give it a spin around if you need to as well. There we go. And off she comes. So with that off, we want to give this face of the hub a really good clean, just so it's a nice clean mating surface. Also, have a good inspection of all your park brake liners, and wouldn't hurt just to give it a bit of a clean as well. Now, this next bit's kind of optional. If you don't want to do it, that's fine, but some sort of anti-seize along this face isn't always a bad idea. Really kind of depends where you are in the world, but I'm just going to throw a little bit way on here. You really don't need much, and I'll just spread that out by hand. It just makes the next time you need to pull this apart that a little bit easier. Now a lot of people use a copper coat or a copper base anti-seize. This is just a nickel one, it's just what I've got lying around, so it will work fine. Wipe off a little bit of excess there. Now it's time to prep the new brake disc. So I'm just using DBA brake rotors. So here's the part number for the BMW. It's a DBA 2857. Now these will have a coating on them from when they've been machined and left the factory so they don't rust, so we're just going to remove those. So just a bit of brake cleaner, and we're just going to clean the brake friction area and also the park brake liner, so both sides here, there, So this just removes any greases or oils that are left over from manufacturer. And the obvious thing to remember here is our retaining bolt. We need to make sure we line that up with that little spot there when we put the rotor back on. So that way. And then that retaining bolt, wherever I put that, can go back in. Now I believe that there was a torque spec of 15 Newton meters on this bolt, but to be honest, it only holds the disc in place. The main clamping force is going to be your wheel when it's on here for all the wheel studs. So don't get too nuts, just a nip is good enough. So the caliper bracket can now go back on. Now I did mention earlier when I was pulling this off of 110 Newton meters, apologies. That is the front bay one. So this rear one is 65 Newton meters. So you can get away with just tightening this stuff up. But being the brake system, I would try and use your appropriate torque settings wherever possible. Now you can also throw some Loctite on these, but I've never done Loctite on most of my brake parts, mainly because I just do it up to the factory torque spec and it shouldn't have an issue. Now of course the problem with this is trying to get a torque wrench in there to tighten it up effectively. So the use of an extension bar may find is required just to get around everything. Just trying to find one that's the right length. Not too short, not too long. Now a tip as well, when you're in sort of compromised positions like this, always use your torque wrench at the handle. Don't try and go short or anything like that, because it will result in an inaccurate torque figure applied to your fastener. So next port of call is we're going to push the piston back in the caliper. Now before we do that, it's probably a good idea just to check your brake fluid reservoir and just make sure, or just check the level, because as we're forcing fluid back, it's going to raise that level. Or you undo the bleed screw and bleed fluid out that way. I don't know whether you'll see it there on the camera, but the level is pretty much at the max on the brake fluid, so we do run the risk of overflowing this, which isn't good. So in order to prevent an overflow at your brake fluid reservoir, either suck some out or, like I mentioned, crack the bleed at the caliper, and we can push the piston back in and just bleed any excess fluid out that way, which is the method I'm going to choose here today. Now if you choose to crack the bleed here, it is a 9mm on the bleed valve, which may be a bit difficult when you got it hung up, but not impossible. So I'm just going to attach a tube to that, just crack that there. You can use specific tools to get these pistons back, but I'm just going to use my old trusty F-clamp. So just hook it on there and just wind it in. And you'll see that'll just force any fluid back in the piston just till it stops firm. Before we let it go, I just close off that bleed valve again and try not to yank our caliper off its tyre wire, and then we can release that there. Alright, so that piston pushed back in, we can throw the inner caliper in. So that clip needs a bit of force, but there we go, and that will just hold itself in place there. Outside caliper will sit in there, so we can just slot that in place like that. Probably a good point in time to get this clip in, because that will just hold everything in place so it won't go falling out on you. Can be a bit fiddly. Sort of work on one side at a time. Sometimes push that in a little bit, and so yeah, and that's in place now, so that's just going to hold that caliper in position. Last thing is the caliper pins. Now I'm just going to throw a little bit of brake grease on those. Brake grease, less is more. Sometimes you do not need a huge amount, just enough to coat it, and then they can go back in place. You just need to make sure that this little part of your brake pad is sitting outside there. If that's part of your brake caliper is sitting on top of that, you won't be able to get that pin back in. These caliper pins are 30 Newton meters for the torque, so they're not super tight. Now, don't forget your little caps for your caliper slide pins, always top and bottom. And on the right hand side, don't forget to plug back in your brake wear sensor. So the final job on the card for this side is obviously put the wheel back on. Those wheel nuts are torqued to 120 Newton meters from memory, and obviously we're going to go do the other side. Now obviously I'm not going to repeat any of this stuff for the other side for you, because it's exactly the same procedure. Now also worth mentioning, depending on your brake pads you're using, you probably will need to do a brake bed-in procedure. If your brakes require a bed-in, there's normally an instructional piece of paper within your brake pad kit, but essentially you want to be getting up to about 60 kilometers an hour and doing 10 hard brakes in a row without coming to a complete stop. You don't want to do that. And once you're done with that, you want to drive around for a couple of kilometers just to let the brakes cool down a bit. This basically burns off any residual oils and crap off the brakes, and also just gets that pad liner onto the brake disc. So that's an important part of the bed-in procedure. Also definitely worth mentioning, you don't do just one side at a time. Do your brakes as a pair for an axle. Don't need to worry about front and back, they can be treated independently, but definitely balance left and right across your axle. So I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to give a like, thumbs up, share, all that sort of stuff. If this video saved you a bit of money, maybe consider the super thanks. It'd be greatly appreciated. And also, if you really enjoy my content, please consider becoming a member of the channel. It's kind of, for YouTube, it's kind of a bit like people doing Patreon and stuff. So you know, it's a small fee each month. It's bugger all. I've tried to keep it as little as possible. It really makes a big difference for the channel, so please consider that. But anyway, until next time, see you later.